They didn't throw me away.
Then why aren't you a Jedi? Why aren't you a Jedi, Osha?
Hey, welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in the Acolyte Episode 6, Teach/Corrupt. So this episode is obviously very short, but I do love that it dives into some interesting themes about corruption, the dark side of the Force, and more importantly, the emotions that actually drive the dark side of the Force. This isn't the kind of episode that is filled with member berries, but it does give us a fascinating portrait of how the Sith survived for 1,000 years. So we're going to break down all the nuances of these dialogue scenes and the Easter eggs in the episode. But first, I want to thank all of you for watching and supporting our channel, and as you know, we love designing merch for you at our merch store where we have brand new Star Wars parody shirts to show you right now. First, we have this Darth Teeth t-shirt, which is a parody of the famous Jaws poster, and we also have one of my personal new favorites, What About Droid Attack on Cookies? And this one has a special place in my heart, May 25th, 1977, the day that all of this began. And this one is the perfect response to haters on the internet. The ability to speak does not make you intelligent.
The ability to speak does not make you intelligent.
We are running a 15% off sale until the end of July 4th, so if you want to buy a shirt, now's a great time. So this is also all in addition to all the other great merch that we have for sale at our store, like Somehow Palpatine Returned, Original Trilogy, Good Soldiers Follow Orders, and many more. Thanks for watching. The links are below. Now, in the last episode, when May and Osha confronted each other, May said,
They've brainwashed you.
and I thought this was very interesting because we normally expect the villains to be the ones who do the brainwashing. But the show keeps teasing us that something happened on Bryndock that Sol and the others have been lying about. And what we're seeing in this show is a subversion of tropes. The Sith acts more like a noble Jedi Master. He treats Osha with care, he feeds her, and offers to teach her the ways of the Force. Whereas Master Sol seems tortured and straps May down to a table. This episode opens, like last episode, with Osha being unconscious. But this time, instead of showing the camera slowly pushing in as she comes back to herself, we begin with the camera tilted on its axis, showing her almost upright. Now this is cluing us in that Osha's world is about to be turned upside down, or at least that she's about to see things from a different point of view. This is also the same shot composition as when we first saw Osha in episode 1, fitting since this episode does represent a new beginning for her. I also just want to flag that she is sleeping on this orthopedic neck pillow that they also used in the show Star Trek Picard. I know because I have the exact same pillow, and in past episodes I have compared Chimere to Yoda. Both of them pretended to be fools in order to gauge the worth of their potential pupils. And here we see that he lives very much like Master Yoda. He lives in very humble surroundings and he's making soup for his guest. Immediately, Osha finds May's dagger, the one that was used to kill Master Endara. But then she also finds her sister's clothes, which she puts on. This is a subtle way to show us that the two of them are soon about to have their roles reversed. But more importantly, I think they're about to switch points of view. I think May is going to have a better understanding of what the Jedi did on Bryndock, while Osha is going to hear a completely different point of view from the stranger. I'll tell you guys, I really like this show, and it has its high points.
She was a child.
You brought her here.
But I do think it's missing an emotional connection between its characters. Like the first time I felt emotionally invested in this show was when Osha said goodbye to Pip.
I love you, Pip.
Cause like, he's been her only friend for years. That's her little buddy. And Doug, that's how I feel about you. You know, just the two of us working here in the store every day. You're my little buddy and I want you to be around for a long time.
Well, thanks, person. I think, I think you're real good too. But my opinion of you varies greatly depending on whether or not you have food.
Oh, what do you mean, like this?
Yes.
Because you know, this food is way better than the stuff you used to eat. This is Badlands Ranch, co-created by Katherine Heigl for her own dogs.
Yeah, well, what makes it so special?
Well, you know how humans have certain superfoods like sweet potatoes or salmon?
Yeah, yeah. So can I have
Well, dogs have superfoods too, and Badlands Ranch is made with dog superfoods like flaxseed and turmeric to help you have a healthier, happier life. See, most of that dry food you used to eat is filled with crap like animal byproducts. You know what that usually means? Carcass remnants like chicken beaks or feathers.
Yeah, I much prefer Badlands Ranch. Can I have some right now?
Like, we tried to make Doug's food for years, but we always had to freeze it. It was a big pain. But Badlands Ranch is air-dried and easy to store like kibble. Oh, look, I'm sorry, Doug. Are you hungry now?
Yes.
Doug loves this food. We have been trying to make our own food for him for years, but the formula and ease of Badlands Ranch makes this the best option to feed him healthy food. I've noticed that Doug now has more energy, he's happier, and best of all, healthy poops.
Are you implying that my poops aren't what they ought to be?
Stop it, you. Doug loves this food so much we actually even use it as treats, and I love knowing that it's so good for him. So go to badlandsranch.com/Doug and order right now to get up to 50% off your regular priced order with a 90-day money-back guarantee. So if you want your dog to experience this incredible food, please go to badlandsranch.com/Doug. Now back to the Acolyte. Now guys, this is where it's going to get fun. First of all, this shot of Osha in the cave looks very much like Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi when he said,
"It's time for the Jedi to end."
So let's talk about whether or not this planet is Acto. That's the planet of the first Jedi Temple where Luke was hiding out in The Last Jedi. It certainly looks like Acto, but I don't think they actually filmed on the island Skellig Michael. That's the island where they filmed much of The Last Jedi. The title just says Unknown Planet. But remember, the location of the Jedi Temple on Acto was lost for thousands of years. So at this point in time, maybe the planet wouldn't really have a name, or at least not a name that history remembered. I also think that there's just something so poetic about the Sith hiding out on a planet that birthed the Jedi Order. For one thing, the Sith split off from the Jedi Order, so this would very much be like their ancestral home as well. Also, the obsidian rocks that we saw at the end of episode 1 look very much like the rocks where Rey ventured into the dark side cave. And remember, the Jedi don't know the location of this temple. It has been lost to history. This would show that the Jedi Order, over the centuries, have lost their way.
Yeah, but I don't see porgs. Can't be an Octo without porgs. Delicious little guys.
Well, we do see these awesome creatures that were created by creature designer Neil Scanlon. These are practical, they're little puppets, and I think they look awesome. And as Darth Asapter on theforce.net points out, these look like they are in the same genus as the Thala Sirens, the sea cow that Luke milked in The Last Jedi. There's also the symbolism of these creatures being a family and touching one another, and this is what Osha wants. When she was a kid, she wanted to be a Jedi, to belong to the Jedi family. But then, as a Jedi, she could not let go of her attachments to her original family. And Chimere is offering her both attachment, closeness, and touch. I should also note that quite a few of you, including Vader's Order and Star Wars RPG GM on Twitter, have pointed out that this planet could also be Baldemnik. Now, in the Legends continuity, this was an ocean planet with tropical islands that had rich deposits of the mineral cortosis, like Osha spots later in the episode. And this cortosis was mined by Darth Plagueis and his master, Darth Tenebris. Personally, I think it would be cool if they combined this world with Acto just to kind of keep it all connected.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
And then we go back to planet Kofar, where Sol is escaping with May. Sol calls for
Emergency Code 0.
which in the awesome but now Legends game Empire of War, Emergency Code 0 was an Imperial emergency code. So the reason Osha has switched places in this episode is because of the show's larger theme of balance. As we know, the Force, as it exists in nature, is in balance. Life balances death, death balances life. And we're going to see that theme come up again and again in this episode. When the show started, May represented the dark side, Osha was the light side, but now as their points of view change, they're going to switch places. So Sol tries to report in, but the comms are busted. So I love seeing like all the ways the show is preventing the Jedi from learning that the Sith still exist. When May steps onto the ship, she is immediately flooded with memories of when the Jedi tested her as a child.
May, in this test, you must divine what images appear on the testing screen.
What do you want me to do?
Because this is the same ship that we saw in that flashback episode, Destiny. And then we see Basil. Now, like I pointed out last week, he is a Tennin, and their species first debuted in the Legends novel Han Solo's Revenge. Creature designer Neil Scanlon has really outdone himself with this guy. Just really shows how cool practical effects can look. Now, Basil knows that something is up right away and that May is an imposter. He can sniff her out. So while Osha is slowly getting seduced by the dark side of the Force, we get this fun cat and mouse game between Basil, May, and Sol.
Hey, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, buddy.
Well, like 2 episodes ago, May said she wanted to turn herself into the Jedi, so how come right now she's trying to avoid being captured?
Well, I think there's a couple reasons for that. One, don't forget that, like, Sol is also still on her kill list, so she might be plotting to kill him whenever she has the chance. But also, remember, she made that plan to betray the Master before the Master actually showed up. Now I think her only plan is to get as far away from everybody as possible so she doesn't get 3-hole punch like Jackie Lon. And Basil repairs Pip, and thank God, guys, I was really worried about him after this. And then, back on Unknown Planet, Chimere begins to seduce Osha to the dark side of the Force. And guys, when Star Wars is written really well, this is how the Sith reveal their true strength. The Sith are not powerful because they're big and scary and have red lightsabers and shoot lightning out of their hands. The Sith are powerful because their way is so much easier.
But easier, more seductive.
The Master is telling Osha everything she wants to hear. Remember, Palpatine didn't conquer the galaxy through Force. He convinced the galaxy to follow him, and this is what the Sith do. Their true strength is convincing people to serve them. To illustrate this, he just lets Osha hold his lightsaber.
Feels good, doesn't it?
Because he understands that his real power isn't through his weapon. His true power is to exploit Osha's desire to have a purpose, and taking advantage of how the Jedi Order cast her away. I also think it's interesting that he immediately begins to try to train her.
You keep your other elbow up higher.
Now, we have seen the Sith do this countless times.
Join me.
In time, you will call me Master.
You need a teacher! I could show you the ways of the Force!
This is your opportunity to embrace your destiny as my apprentice.
You must join me, Obi-Wan, and together we will destroy the Sith.
Remember, the Sith are always seeking an apprentice. This goes back to Darth Bane's rule of 2. There must always be a master to have power and an apprentice to covet that power. He says,
Your anger betrays your thoughts.
and again, we have heard this before from Luke.
Your thoughts betray you, Father.
Now, we've been pointing out many similarities between Darth Vader, the Chosen One, and the twins, May and Osha, so I don't think this line is a coincidence, especially if it turns out that May and Osha, like Anakin, were created with midichlorians. And then, to show the audience that he's really not that bad of a guy, he changes from his black suit to a light gray tunic. Now, this symbolism goes all the way back to the original Star Wars trilogy. In the first movie, Luke was pure and innocent, so he wore white. And in the second movie, he was slipping to the dark side, so he wore gray. And then, in Return of the Jedi, when he is closest to the dark side, he wears complete black. So to convince Osha to join him, the Master has to present himself as a reasonable person, as somebody who's not evil or good, but who sees the moral gray of the galaxy. So then the ship connects to the hyperdrive in orbit, similar to how ships like Jedi starfighters in the prequel trilogy travel through hyperspace with a separate ring. And when the power goes out, all of a sudden the vibe shifts straight into like a horror movie. Right here, composer Michael Abels really outdid himself.
Give me a couple minutes.
Back on Coruscant, this alien is a Selkath, and their species was originally featured in the 2003 Knights of the Old Republic video game. Thanks very much, Nick Panev on Twitter, for that awesome catch. Vernestra Rwoh is meeting with Senator Chuant, who is an Abonado. Now, we learn that certain senators are very critical of the Jedi Order.
My colleagues in the expansion region will vote in favor of an external review of the Order.
Now look, we have talked about this on the channel before, how in the High Republic books, the Jedi are very much an autonomous body separate from the Galactic Senate. But then, in the prequels, suddenly the Jedi Council are in regular meetings with Chancellor Palpatine, and they take immediate charge of the New Republic military. What we're seeing here is the transition between those two states. Gradually, certain member planets in the Outer Rim trust the Jedi less and less.
We received a distress call from Master Sol. Apparently he's on a mission in the Outer Rim.
And it makes total sense that these Outer Rim worlds would trust the Jedi the least. The High Republic books are about the Jedi spreading into the Outer Rim like missionaries, spreading word of the Force and the Republic. Now this stoked a lot of resentment amongst some groups, like the Nihil. And even though we don't know how the book series ends yet, it's pretty certain that the Republic's growth in the Outer Rim was stunted by the presence of the Nihil space pirates. And in this scene, we are seeing the political ramifications of the Jedi's failed expansion into the Outer Rim. Back on Unknown Planet, the Master tells us that he used to be a Jedi. Now, we have talked about this at length on the channel, that he could actually be Darth Plagueis, and that May and Osha are actually a Force dyad. That is, two people who are joined together in the Force who share immense power, like Rey and Ben Solo. Palpatine and Darth Plagueis tried to create a Force dyad, but it failed. However, this is why Palpatine recognizes the power of the Force dyad in Rise of Skywalker. Now, Palpatine does tell Anakin that Darth Plagueis was able to use the midichlorians to cheat death. So, when Kymir says,
"You speak as if you were a Jedi."
I was, a long time ago.
This makes me think that he could indeed be Darth Plagueis, and that he has been able to use the Force to slow his aging process. And then he tells her exactly what she wants to hear, that she, Osha, is strong in the Force.
That's your strength in the Force, Osha.
Back on the ship, Pip, like Basil, immediately recognizes that May is an imposter, and after he's wired into the ship, he makes it shoot gunk into her eye.
Yeah, see that's just good old-fashioned Star Wars humor right there. I like that.
Also, notice that when she resets him to factory setting, his lights suddenly turn red. This is obviously like when C-3PO was reprogrammed to read the Sith dagger in Rise of Skywalker, but it's also like when Leia's droid Layla was reprogrammed in the show Obi-Wan Kenobi. One thing I really love about this show is how it's expanding what we know about the Star Wars galaxy and about the Force. For instance, we know that the Jedi take their pupils when they are very young, but here the Master explains why.
Without training, it fades.
The Jedi teach there's only one way to access the Force, and if you don't do it their way, it fades.
It's the space version of if you don't use it, you lose it. And then he tells Osha that essentially she needs to embrace a wider view of the Force, very similar to the seductive words that Palpatine used on Anakin.
But there is another way.
And I gotta tell you, I thought this episode was way too short and that the show would work better as a binge watch, but man, the dialogue is so well written.
Why do you love people who can only go so far?
Like that cuts right to the heart of Osha's problem. She was not able to let go of attachments when she was a Jedi student. She always saw those attachments as her greatest failure. Because I failed! But here, the Master is telling her, you didn't fail the Jedi failed you. And those attachments will actually be your greatest strength. I think it's also very interesting that he knows more about her past than she does. I mean, he knew that Osha was alive, but he didn't tell her sister. This makes me think that his end goal is to get the two of them together so he can draw on the energy of their Force dyad. He also gently touches her on the arm, and this made me think about how crucial touch is for human beings. Osha was raised in a coven, and from what we can see, she was very loved. She was surrounded by maternal figures who would hug her often. But then she was taken away by the Jedi Order, who are, by design, very cold, distant, and avoid attachments.
I don't talk about feelings, Alfred. I don't have any. I've never seen one.
But then, this incredibly good-looking man suddenly is touching her, not because he's trying to train her or because he wants something from her. He's touching her because it feels like the human thing to do, or at least that's how she perceives it. Osha is so naive, I think she's an easy mark for a Sith Lord to seduce her. And then we go back to Coruscant at the Jedi Temple, and notice how the areas around the temple look very different from they do in the prequel trilogy. This is because these areas are still under construction. You can actually see signs of the construction here. When Vernestra says,
"Joining us on the mission, Master?"
I am.
The Padawan replies,
"You get nauseous when you travel through hyperspace?"
Now look, Ro is a really cool character in the High Republic books. She was the youngest Padawan of her era to become a Jedi Knight at just 15 years old. She also suffered the loss of her master early on in the series, and this led to her becoming a Jedi Wayseeker, which meant that she followed the will of the Force and not the will of the Council. And this show is demonstrating just how much she has changed over the past 100 years or so. Instead of being someone who defies the will of the Council to seek out the will of the Force, she is now stuck playing politics. Hell, she even keeps secrets from the Jedi Council specifically for political reasons.
A scandal like this would inspire fear and mistrust. We should handle this ourselves.
Now, I bring all this up because Vernestra Ro has a unique connection to hyperspace. On the channel before, we have talked about how hyperspace travel is intrinsically linked to the Force. The very first hyperspace travelers followed the movements of the Purrgil. That's the space whales that we saw in the shows Star Wars Rebels and Ahsoka. But then the earliest navigators were Force-sensitive individuals. Before the invention of the hyperdrive nav computers, Force-sensitive navigators had to detect when it was safe to drop out of hyperspace.
Yeah, but what does that got to do with Vernestra Ro?
Well, I'll tell you, when Vernestra Ro is in hyperspace, she does get nauseous, but she also sees visions in the Force. For instance, later in this episode, we see her break out her wicked cool laser whip. So this weapon is traditionally forbidden by the Jedi Order. Weapons like this were used by the Witches of Dathomir and by Zygerian slavers. But in the books, Vernestra saw a vision of herself wielding this laser whip, so she built the whip for herself, but then hid it from the rest of the Jedi Order. Now, the whip ended up saving her life and the lives of many other people. My main point here is that hyperspace travel makes Vernestra grow stronger in the Force. That's her special gift. Now, Vernestra says,
I don't get sick. I find it unsettling.
Because she has these hyperspace visions. Clearly, in the past 100 years or so, she saw something in hyperspace that changed the trajectory of her life and turned her into the cynical political player. I also think it's interesting that later she recognizes the work of the Sith and says,
something to tip the scales.
The scales could be referencing the balance of the Force, because the Sith are always trying to tilt the balance toward the dark side. She definitely knows more than she's letting on about the Sith. Let me know your theories down in the comments. But not only that, but let's think about that whip. And now let's look at the scars on Chimere's back. Several of you, like Medium Rare Gamer on Twitter, have pointed out that a whip like that could definitely leave some gnarly scars. Now we know that Vernestra Ro is about 150 years old at this point.
You're old!
And in this episode, she acts very strange. She's not surprised to see that a lightsaber killed all these Jedi. I think she knew that there was a rogue Jedi or a Sith out there somewhere. Remember, a few episodes ago, she even blamed the assassinations on a rogue Jedi.
You think a Jedi taught her? Even a hologram can tell me that.
If Chimere is telling the truth and he used to be a Jedi, I think that he could have been Vernestra's Padawan. And then he would have broken some rule about passion or attachment, and Vernestra Ro would have fought him, leaving these scars.
But wait, if the Jedi saw the lightsaber wounds, then they would know that the Sith were back. But in the Phantom Menace, Treehead says,
the Sith have been extinct for a millennium.
But that's where you're wrong, because the young Padawan immediately blames Master Soul.
You don't think Master Soul was responsible.
We've already seen that Vernestra is willing to keep secrets and play politics. So when this ends, I think that she's going to blame all of these deaths on Master Soul. I'm also thinking that she might have fallen to the dark side and she could be a secret Sith.
Good.
So when Osha says,
"Your Jedi Master?"
he says nothing. Now this could be because he got these scars from his former Sith Master, who then drove him away and then forced him to become the original Knight of Ren.
Knights of Ren. Cool.
And this could be why we keep hearing the Kylo Ren theme in this show.
We are.
Back on the Jedi ship, Soul is grappling with his failure to sense a Sith Lord when he was standing right next to him.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. He also can't sense me.
Yeah, well, dude, he can't sense May because he's not trying to sense her. People can't just sense Force-sensitive individuals when they're standing right next to them.
That's not how the Force works.
Also, Soul is very upset and confused. Right now, all of these emotions are clouding his connection to the Force. But then Basil, the little snitch, literally sniffs out May, and Soul shoots her with a stun beam like we first saw in A New Hope.
There's one. Set for stun.
But I think May being on his ship finally gives Master Soul purpose and direction. When he discovers her, the first thing he does is turn off his transponder and jump to hyperspace. For 15 years, he has wanted to put things right. And now he finally has the person in front of him who he can explain himself to and finally apologize and atone for his actions. Back on Unknown Planet, Chimere is repairing his helmet. Now, in the last episode, we pointed out that the theme at the end before the credits is Kylo Ren's theme, and it's also repeated in this episode. And here, we also see him repairing his broken helmet just like Kylo Ren did at the beginning of Rise of Skywalker. The show might be hinting, as a lot of you have theorized, that instead of him being a Sith, he could actually be one of the Knights of Ren. After all, he does say,
But the Jedi like you might call me Sith.
But honestly, I would be really disappointed if this was the case. This dude is a Sith Lord, and I'm 90% sure he's Darth Plagueis. After all, he tells us what he wants.
The power of two.
And that, my friends, is a Force dyad. He tells her,
Cortosis.
And by the way, big shout out to all of you who pointed this out to me on my Twitter last week. Cortosis has been around since the Legends novel I, Jedi, but it was canonized in the very good Thrawn novel, Thrawn Alliances. And it looks like Chimere has made his headquarters beneath a mountain of this material. He tells her,
but also a sensory deprivation headpiece, like we used as younglings.
So this Easter egg goes all the way back to Star Wars A New Hope. When Obi-Wan is training Luke how to use the Force, he makes him wear a helmet with the blast shield down. By closing himself off from the physical world, this allowed Luke to attune himself to the spiritual world. And then, in Attack of the Clones, of course, we saw Yoda teaching younglings using this same method. Also, speaking of Yoda, when Chimere describes the helmet, he says,
so it's just you and the Force, and what you bring with you.
And this is also how Yoda described the Dark Side Cave in Empire Strikes Back.
What's in there?
Only what you take with you.
This is because the dark side of the Force is neutral. It's a force of nature. It's no more evil than a hurricane. But when our emotions begin to manipulate the dark side feeds off of and amplifies those emotions. In other words, when you use the dark side, you use what you take with you. Now, this technique of shutting yourself off from the rest of the world is similar to many meditation techniques that are practiced around the world. The reason you recite a mantra when you meditate is because it helps you to make your mind a blank slate, so you're not distracted or paying attention to the physical world around you. This is also why in the show Stranger Things, Eleven was best able to use her powers when she was in a sensory deprivation tank. The Jedi use meditation as a way to distance themselves from their own thoughts and desires so they can fully connect to the Force. And by the way, not for nothing, this is illustrated beautifully in the High Republic novels, which present meditation from the third-person point of view of a Jedi being enveloped in the Force. Now the Sith, though, also meditate, but their meditation is more about forced concentration on their desires. For example, Darth Vader's meditations on Mustafar were all about trying to bring Padme back from the realm of the dead, and Chimere spells out the appeal of the Sith philosophy to Osha.
Below the surface of consciousness are powerful emotions. Anger, fear, loss.
Now all of that sounds very appealing, but it's also similar to how Yoda described the path to the dark side.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
However, Chimere left out a key emotion: hate. Chimere explains to her that the dark side of the Force doesn't offer you vengeance, it offers you freedom. But as we see in the movies and the show, this is not true. The dark side makes you a slave to the dark side, and a slave to your master. Back on Kofar, Vernestra is able to piece together segments of the battle as we hear clips from the fight. Now, I'm not sure if this is just like a cinematic technique to show that she is piecing together what's happened, you know, like Dom on the side of the road in Furious 6, or if she is actually sensing a force echo.
Oh, you mean like this? Force.
No, Doug, a force echo is a particular ability in the Force. Cal Kestis has it in the Fallen Order video games. It essentially allows you to touch an object or a place and then sense echoes of the past that occurred with that object or setting. This is what also allowed Rey to see visions of Luke's fight with Vader in The Empire Strikes Back when she touched Anakin's saber. Now, back on Unknown Planet, we see that Chimere's seduction is working. Osha approaches the helmet, the symbol of the dark side of the Force, and rather than recoil from it because it looks monstrous, kind of like Jaws, am I right? She is suddenly curious about this power. Notice how the scar on the back of the helmet is also similar to the scars that Chimere has on his back. It's a subtle way to show that the mask is an extension of the Sith user. Also in the past, we have talked about various Sith artifacts and masks and how they hold different abilities and are symbols of their users. But I think the strongest power that any Sith mask has is simply that it looks cool. It is seductive. People want to look like a badass. And right here, we see Osha is pulled in by this mask. And when she puts it on, a couple of different things are happening here. One, we see that Chimere was fighting the Jedi completely blind. That meant that when he was killing all of these Jedi and behaving so erratically, he was doing this simply by sensing everyone through the Force. And the reason his movements were so erratic is because he was feeding off of the dark side of the Force and fighting blind. This means that Chimere would be an incredibly powerful Force user. Now, when Osha puts the helmet on, we see it from her point of view. This is a direct visual parallel to Anakin Skywalker wearing the Darth Vader helmet for the first time at the end of Revenge of the Sith. I love that shot so much because we briefly get to see the red lenses that Vader sees the world through, which makes this line have even more punch.
Just for once, let me look on you with my own eyes.
But in this scene, the helmet also shows us that Osha is now taking a different view of the dark side of the Force. By surrounding her vision with the helmet, she is cutting herself off from the outside world. She is literally looking into the darkness. And now she's going to connect to that spiritual world we were talking about earlier. However, instead of connecting to a broader view of the Force, she is now going to draw from the dark side of the Force.
It offered something you needed. You didn't even try to stop yourself.
And just to make sure this parallel isn't lost on us, we end with this Darth Vader-like breathing. Well guys, that's all the Easter eggs that we caught, but if you caught any, let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.